And with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to Stephanie Helms, who's the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council, to provide an introduction to the week.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Stephanie Helms, and I'm the Executive Coordinator to the Washington Invasive Species Council, and I am thrilled to welcome you to Day 2 of the Invasive Species Awareness Week, which Governor Jay Inslee proclaimed this week in solidarity with the national event. All around the United States, there are events and webinars happening to raise awareness and highlight simple actions that we can all take to stop and prevent the spread of invasive species here in Washington State. To put a dollar figure on this, the cost of damage, management, and control of invasive species amounts to over $1.2 trillion globally over the last 50 years. That's just economically. We know that outside that dollar amount, that invasive species harm nearly every aspect of our lives, including ecological and agricultural damage, impacts to native species, and as well as loss of recreational opportunities. The good news is that we all have a role to play and have this unique opportunity to raise awareness, focus on prevention, and get involved to work together to protect all that we hold dear in Washington State. And with that, I want to personally thank you all again for being here, and let's all join together to thank our colleagues at Department of Fish and Wildlife for joining us here today at this webinar. I am pleased to introduce Justin Bush, Aquatic Invasive Species Policy Coordinator for the Aquatic Invasive Species Unit, and Captain Eric Anderson, who is the Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Invasive Species Enforcement Captain. Today, they will be speaking on invasive freshwater quagga and zebra mussels and the threat that they pose to Washington's economy and environment. Take it away, Justin and Captain Eric.
All right. Well, happy Invasive Species Awareness Week, everyone. We're really pleased to be a part of this really great event and want to talk about a significant threat that is on the horizon and the threat that it poses to Washington's economy and environment. I'm joined today by Captain Eric Anderson. Go ahead and say hello, Captain.
Thank you, Justin. Again, Eric Anderson, I run our enforcement program for aquatic invasive species. And just like Justin was talking about, we have a significant threat that's on the horizon here in the state of Washington. And while that's a big threat, we also want to highlight that there's a lot of other invasive species out there, aquatic invasive species that have potential. And that's what we're working to try and prevent, because prevention is the key.
Thank you, Captain. So within the state of Washington, our state legislature has appointed the Department of Fish and Wildlife as a lead state agency for managing invasive species in the animal kingdom. But when we think about this, we think about the challenge of invasive species is that they don't respect legal jurisdictions and they move across the landscape without thinking about those boundaries. And so while the State Department of Fish and Wildlife is a lead state agency, we can't do this alone. So to effectively prevent and stop invasive species, we need to work together with all the different jurisdictions on the landscape in order to be successful. Wanted to provide some background information on what the State Department of Fish and Wildlife is doing around aquatic invasive species. Some of our core functions focus on prevention. Any amount of prevention that we can do, we can take action in order to prevent future problems that we will then have to respond to and then mitigate and recover our environment and our economy for many years, which is really the goal number one. When prevention fails, we want to respond as quickly as possible, taking swift action for the purpose of eradication, meaning fully removing something from the environment, using rapid response techniques. Where we cannot be effective in eradicating, meaning fully removing a population of invasive species, we then look at infested site management in opportunities to contain the problem using regulations, using different protocols, such as containment systems, in order to prevent that problem from spreading to new areas. And we can't do this alone. Again, we work heavily with local partners as well as regional partners, even international partners to work together to solve this same problem. It's really a global issue, and we must work with other jurisdictions to be successful. And a key component is much like this week is education outreach. Every person has a role to play, and we all must do our part in order to be effective in solving this shared problem. Captain, anything to add?
Well, no, you hit the nail on the head, right? That we can't do this alone. Yes, we're the department, we're the state lead on it, but this is a huge state. And we have to effectively partner with other agencies and the public. Just like the example of the sign that we have there, the public is the key to helping us prevent these things. And like the last bullet point on it is, yes, we enforce the laws against this as well. Again, not our main component to try to hammer people on this, but again, you have to have the regulations there to try and urge people to do the right thing as well.
So the Department of Fish and Wildlife has two programs that focus on aquatic invasive species. The element that I have the honor of leading is the fish programs component. So in that we have two sections, the prevention section, as well as the ballast water and biofouling section. And we have a variety of different projects leading prevention, early detection and monitoring efforts, as well as permitting. We also have cross-program collaboration with information technology, communications and public and outreach, as well as our habitat program around funding of European green crab. And then the big piece is enforcement that we'll lead into in a minute, which is kind of our sister program within the agency. So taking a brief tour of what the fish program's efforts look like, ballast water and biofouling, and there certainly is a connection with quagga and zebra mussels, as you'll see in a few slides. But we have ships in Washington that are involved in commerce, large vessels that take on water when they are empty so they can go to our port. When they arrive at our port, they then dump that ballast water, and sometimes animals can be a part of that. And we're working very hard to address that with international as well as national organizations. But this is a really critical piece of what the Department of Fish and Wildlife does that's truly preventative in nature. And then looking at our prevention section, this is where we classify species. We focus on decontamination as well as containment. We have permitting and regulation efforts around in-water construction, for example, where there may be invasive species on site. We lead statewide early detection monitoring efforts. We'll see a little bit more in depth later on. And when we find something, we then mobilize actions to then respond. And one of the connection points throughout the Department of Fish and Wildlife's holistic program is education outreach. We really can't do enough of it. It's why I'm so pleased the Washington Invasive Species Council is focusing on this today. And we really need everyone's assistance in order to do our work and be successful. Go ahead, Captain.
And like Justin said, there's, within the agency, every program within the agency is touched by invasive species. But between fish management and our enforcement program, we're the co-leads. Justin and I are the co-leads in the state, and I operate our watercraft inspection program, which is our #1 tool for attempting to prevent these things from entering the state. A major vector is the overland transport of aquatic invasive species on watercraft. And so in an effort to do that, we have established an inspection program, and it's a mandatory watercraft inspection program where anybody that is transporting watercraft or any aquatic conveyance, if they come across our stations and they're open, they must stop in for an inspection. As you can see, one of the pictures there at the top, we have our aquatic invasive species mussel dog, Finn, actively inspecting with his nose a jet ski, making sure that it's not bringing anything in. If at one of these stations, we do encounter a boat or watercraft that is contaminated, we actively either decontaminate it there on site with our technicians that are trained on doing this, or we will have a decontamination order where we'll quarantine the boat for a certain length of time. Couple other issues that we do with enforcement is there is trafficking or other things that are happening in the state where aquatic invasive species are brought in. Some of you may be aware that a few years ago we had a national I won't say incident, but zebra mussels were brought into the state via mossballs through aquariums through two major pet retailers. And enforcement took the lead on going in and inspecting those entities and leading to get the state to recall that, so it did not pose a threat. And Justin and I were leads in also working with those major retailers nationally to get them pulled off of the shelf. And finally, just like Justin said, the major thing that we do is education and outreach. And we, down there at the bottom picture, we actually have an education and outreach trailer that we got wrapped last year. We had an outreach event where we had a student that designed all the information that's on that trailer, and we take that to a lot of events around the state. Again, prevention is outreach and education key. Within our structure, obviously I lead it for the state, but then we also have, like I said, the stations. We have a field coordinator that's over in Eastern Washington, and then we have 4 what we call regional areas of watercraft inspection. We have our Spokane station, we have one out of Pasco, one down out of Clarkston, and then we have a Southwest Washington station. And we're working across the state. This year we actually, or excuse me, 2023, we inspected over 58,000 vessels coming into the state, and we had over 25 interceptions of zebra quagga mussels on those. So the team's working really hard to try to prevent these things from going into the state. Go back to you, Justin.
Yeah, and it's a fitting segue, Captain. It really is an all-team effort across the Department of Fish and Wildlife. And while fish program and enforcement program certainly had the most significant efforts, it's a cross-cutting issue for us. And I think that's the same for all organizations that face this same challenge. Working with organizations such as legislative affairs, tribal affairs, communications and public outreach, as well as capital asset and management program, the folks that do our construction and manage our assets, habitat, wildlife, IT, and budget human resources. And so we really couldn't do the job that we've been tasked to do without everyone working together, and really can't speak highly enough of the department's efforts and priority for invasive species overall. So thought would lead into the conversation today about the threat of quagga and zebra mussels by looking at the overall approach to invasions and generally how they're managed, and wanted to do a shout out to the Washington Invasive Species Council for their early detection rapid response best practices, and really encourage us all to take a look at this and figure out how to apply this information to the challenges that we all face. Currently today, quagga and zebra mussels are absent, although they are intercepted at our watercraft check stations, and that's exactly where we aim to keep it. And if we all work together, we can be successful in that. However, oftentimes when an invasive species is able to enter a new area and establish, the population is small enough that you can actually take actions to eradicate it, meaning fully remove it. Where that fails, we then think about containment and efforts to keep it in limited distribution, protecting the highest base resources. And then over time, if that population keeps spreading, we don't have the resources to effectively manage it. So we focus on the best areas and the highest value sites, whether that's irrigation systems, dams and other critical infrastructure, or really pristine habitats such as national parks. Captain, anything to add?
You hit that nail on the head. We're good.
So one of the tasks of the State Invasive Species Council is to develop a ranking scheme that can look across all invasive species of every type, and whether they're here or they're near, such as right on the horizon, or something that we know would be very damaging to our environment and our economy, but is a little further off. And the council has ranked all invasive species that are regulated by all the different organizations that are members, and put them onto a chart to basically set the compass for all organizations for how they should be managing and prioritizing species. Of all the different species that have been analyzed, quagga and zebra mussels have the greatest impact of all the species that have been looked at. So while there's a great debate about the number 2 and the number 3 priority, all organizations typically agree that quagga and zebra mussels are really the highest priority for our state.
And I'll add on that, the reason that they are truly the highest priority species, and we'll get into it farther, they will affect every citizen in the state of Washington in some fashion. So just think about that. They will affect every citizen, and we'll keep. So zebra and quagga mussels, they are a freshwater mussel. They're Obviously, we've classified them as prohibited in the state of Washington. They're prohibited level 1. We have never detected them in the state, don't want them in the state. And the key between these and other native freshwater mussels is that these have abyssal threads, and that's what allows them to attach to hard surfaces. They were native to Eastern Europe, and they got here in America. Next slide. We didn't do the spread, but if they get here, one of the biggest things that they will impact, like I said, will impact every citizen. They are going to hit our hydroelectric dams. And we are looking at greater than 100 million annual cost to mitigate these things. And that was 2017. There was a study back in around 2005, 2007, and it put each dam at 20 million a year. And when you think about that, we have, if I remember right, there's almost 29 type of hydro projects or dams on the Columbia River. And so just think about the impact on that. This would hit every citizen in the power budget every year. Your cost to produce that would go up annually. The other thing that would happen, obviously, is, and we'll hit on the native species here, but on these dams, we have the native salmonids, our salmon and steelhead that are going up the Columbia River. And there's a percentage of mortality at these dams because of the salmon having to go through the bypass facilities. The mortality will go up exponentially as these bypass facilities actually become inundated with zebra quagga mussels. They have super sharp edges on them. And it essentially would, my favorite phrase is, it would turn the dams into a Cuisinart for both the adults and our juvenile smotes trying to make it out to the ocean. Very significant impact if zebra quagga mussels get into Columbia River and start attaching at our hydroelectric facilities. Next slide. And so again, go ahead, Justin, you take this one.
Yeah, and building on that, so that economic impact that has been forecast is just looking at mitigation to hydroelectric facilities alone. That doesn't tally the potential impact or ongoing maintenance costs to fish passage. So we could assume it would be potentially doubled, if not more. One of the things we also need to think about is if fisheries are reduced overall, there are jobs and in an economic industry that's tied to that, which is a huge economic impact. And we can see that, in 2006, over 540 million in personal income was tied with fisheries. And then beyond the economics of it, really, salmon and steelhead really are a lot of what it means to be a Pacific Northwesterner, to be a Washingtonian. And then thinking about the value culturally to our tribal nations as well. And, the value of salmon is really, you can't assign a value to it. And all of that is significantly at risk from these species. So putting some other things to the risk is the potential impact to drinking water. There are 28 public utilities in the state, 14 of which provide drinking water. And surface water intake specifically could be highly infested and impacted by clog and zebra mussels. One of the things that we're thinking about are other water users of the Columbia River, for example, and thinking about server farms for the tech industry, for example, that powers our cloud internet. That's all contingent on clean, cool water. And any surface water taken from an area with clog and zebra mussels could be heavily impacted. Captain, do you want to take the next one?
And then again, next thing down the line, Washington's economy, not only based on fisheries, but based on agriculture, huge impacts to our state. I want to say there's 98 irrigation districts in Washington, if I remember the phrase right. Is that right, Justin? I think we're at 98, but each one of them literally serves dozens and dozens of farms, and they are pulling from that Columbia River system. And if mussels get into those irrigation systems, they will plug the pumps, the filters, the screens, the pipes. They will affect from the inlet on the river out to the nozzles going out in the field. A significant problem and a huge cost increases to agriculturally raised products in the state of Washington.
And finally, we know that the value of recreation is over $26 billion annually. Anything that's touching fresh water could potentially be impacted. So leaving your boat in the lake tied up to a dock for a certain amount of time would certainly become encrusted with mussels. We know this from other inland states that are facing the same challenge. Thinking about the impacts to docks, to beach shorelines, lots of examples of mussels cutting people's feet, actually attaching to aquatic plants, and when people are swimming in the water in the infested areas, becoming sliced open by the razor sharp shells. So we don't exactly know what the potential economic impact could be, but it would certainly be high in a lot of cases. Captain?
Well, and then the other thing on that, particularly with recreation, is now all of a sudden you have boats in an area that are infested, and they are the vector to transport those mussels to the next area, which again, we're trying to stop that. The other thing we'll put in on this going back to the natural resources is our endangered species in the state of Washington. We have over 40 years of ESA work trying to protect the salmon and the steelhead going up the Columbia River. In one fell swoop, that could be erased with zebra and quagga mussels. And then that affects the whole entire food web and system associated with it. We got the picture right there of our killer whales, the Puget Sound killer whales, which are endangered as well. Their main source of food is those Columbia River salmon that are going out there. And if that's greatly reduced, it's going to affect them. It affects the whole entire food web on it. Anything do you want to add there, Justin?
Yeah, no, that was great, Captain. You know, when we think about invasive species, we think about direct impacts as well as indirect impacts. So reduction of fish would mean a prey availability reduction for things like southern resident killer whales. And then thinking about other infrastructure, any infrastructure that touches fresh water could be impacted. That includes hatcheries. And then thinking about recreation and access, we could anticipate that in order to prevent the spread, water bodies could be regulated, access could be restricted, there may be requirements to coming and going from a water body. And that's not something we've necessarily experienced very much in the Columbia River or in Washington State. And most recently, and we're building to the situation in Idaho, Idaho actually shut down public access to a water body, which I think says a lot about the importance. So thinking about you know, something that we should all be aware of, it's being aware of how to identify quagga and zebra mussels. And when you're looking at freshwater mussels, the key difference are those byssal threads. The byssal threads are what allows the mussel to attach to any hard surface. So any freshwater mussel that it's attached to a hard surface should be something you immediately report. If it's not a mussel, it's a snail or some other lookalike species, we're happy to take a look. We're happy to tell you a little bit about it. We really want to find the very first invasive mussel that gets established in Washington. We could really use your help to do that. Captain, anything to add?
Actually, no, we don't want to find the very first one. We don't want one algae in there. We don't
Oh, if
want
they
one
get
there,
established, we want to find it
but
immediately.
but yes, we do want to find the first one. If we want to be on top of it quick to see if we can get rid of it. But that's all I'd add.
So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but did want to show the life cycle of quagga and zebra mussels. And what it essentially, the takeaway is this: adults can live between 3 and 9 years, and it takes multiple adults in order to spawn and create the next generation. Before the spawn larvae start to develop and attach to a hard surface, they're planktonic veligers that are actually only visible under a microscope. And so when we think about clean, drain, dry, and how you can assist with stopping the potential spread of this, we need to realize that in certain parts of their life cycle, they're not actually visible to the naked eye. So any water from an infested water body could be a problem, and we need to treat it as though they could be present. But the other thing to note is that those veligers can actually drift for up to 1 month or 30 days before it attaches to a hard surface. And as we talk about what happened in Idaho and some of the things we're thinking about in the future, that's going to be a really critical thing to touch on. Eric, anything?
Well, not only can the veligers float for a month, but one thing, again, going back to watercraft, in the right condition, the adults attached to a watercraft can live out of the water for up to a month. And so there's the other thing, the critical thing on the clean, drained, and dried.
Thank you, Captain. So we were going to show the spread. We just weren't ready yet. Going back to part of what I'm responsible for, it's the regulation of ballast water, and we're making a lot of progress with international regulations, national standards, and state enforcement. That's all to say that we have learned a lot, and we're preventing a lot of new problems through ballast water management. But prior to that happening, unfortunately, some species were introduced to the United States through contaminated ballast water. And that's essentially what happened here in the Great Lakes with quagga and zebra mussels in the late 1980s. Captain?
Yeah, they were discovered in Lake St. Clair, which is a connector lake, and I believe it's between Superior and Huron in 1988. And like Justin said, it was figured that they were brought in on the ballast tanks of a ship that was coming from probably Eastern Europe. And the scary thing on this is, yes, they were discovered in 1988, but it only took them 5 years to completely inundate the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River region. They reproduce exponentially. A spawning pair, male and female, can produce up to 1 million larvae in a spawn cycle, and they have a high survivability rate with almost 33% or more surviving. And so as you can figure out how, if 33% take off and there's multiples, and they can have lots of spawning cycles in a year. Water temperatures actually regulate the spawning cycles. But think about that. In 5 years, the entire Great Lakes region, they were detected in every Great Lake and the Mississippi River regions, and they were in high numbers. And fortunately, we kept them at bay up until about 2007, and that was through education and outreach. But in 2007, we had a close to 1,000-mile jump, and they were discovered down in the Colorado River area in Lake Mead. And so that was the first strike in the Western U.S., and it caused us to go on high alert, because every place that they're established then, like I said, becomes a source location for them to travel outward on watercraft.
So for 2 decades, just a massive amount of effort has gone in to protecting the Columbia River Basin from the introduction and establishment of quagga and zebra mussels. And this has been something that we've been working very hard at many different fronts, nationally, internationally, regionally, and within Washington to address. And our world shifted substantially in September of 2023 when Governor Brad Little, governor of the state of Idaho, made the announcement that quagga mussels had been discovered near Twin Falls. And this is the very first introduction, known verified introduction of quagga or zebra mussels within the entire Columbia River Basin. So 20 years worth of effort, hundreds of millions of dollars being put into this effort. And unfortunately, the system did fail in some way. And this really can't be understated, the importance of this. This very well could be the most significant invasive species issue of this generation. Captain, anything to add?
No, good on that.
So I mentioned that that larvae and adults would be critical to this conversation. The state of Idaho detected planktonic villagers taking plankton toes and then sending those samples for analysis under a microscope by experts. So floating villagers were found. There's a whole process to send it to independent labs, do multiple sampling in order to verify that it's a positive water body. And once that process was completed, that's when Governor Brad Little then mobilized that response. In gearing up for the response, the state of Idaho did surveys that included a scuba survey. And during that scuba survey, they found one benthic adult. And that was significant. They did not kill it. And during their treatment, they monitored that benthic adult. They were able to kill it with their treatment, so that we know that at least within the treatment area, it certainly was effective. But again, it takes more than one adult to spawn. And then because of the protocols to call water body positive, there's numerous sampling events that happened and the planktonic veligers were found multiple times. And so while we can't read a whole lot into that, it is a little bit alarming. Captain, anything to add?
Well, going on to it again, it's disconcerting that they found it, but I want to give the state of Idaho props. The fact that they took it serious, the governor declared an emergency, and they went in with a treatment that was only 2 weeks after the discovery. We're cautiously optimistic that they hit it hard enough to prevent the population from being established, but we're going to have to keep monitoring it in a big way. So one of the things that like I said, what we're doing is we're ratcheting up our watercraft inspections. Because again, now's not the time to stop prevention. Now is the time to really ratchet it up. As I indicated earlier, we actually have 5 areas of inspections that we're doing it. As you can see on the map, there's Spokane, Clarkston, Pasco, and Cle Elum. Those are static stations, and they stop all watercraft coming on the highways, passing the station. And then down in Southwest Washington, we don't have a great spot for a static roadside inspection program there. And so what we have is boat ramp roving inspections, where our technicians are going to the highest volume boat ramps in Southwest Washington, and they're inspecting boats before they launch. And as you can see on the little graph there, that we have been going up quite significantly in our inspections through the years. And like I said, in 2023, we did over 58,000 inspections, and we've intercepted 25 watercraft that had mussels on it. So that's a star of prevention there.
And the only thing that I'd add is, while we're very hopeful, and we'll talk a little bit more about the situation in Idaho in a moment, while we're very hopeful that was effective and that treatment eradicated that population, we're still at imminent threat in Washington. And as the captain's shown, we're irregularly intercepting watercraft over 20 with mussels on them every year. And so we're hoping for the best in Idaho, but we also know that we're under imminent threat. So wanted to point out that there's been a 2-decade-long effort to protect the Columbia River Basin, and that's the outline that you see here. And Washington's not doing this alone. We do this in partnership with a variety of provinces, with Canadian and U.S. federal agencies, as well as other states and local partners that operate inspection stations in some areas. And all this effort is put together in order to protect the Columbia River Basin and stop the spread of quagga and zebra mussels across the Western United States. So just wanted to acknowledge that what we're doing here is being replicated in other areas is one comprehensive strategy to protect the uninfested waters. Eric?
Yeah, we work hand in hand with what we call the Columbia River Basin Team, the CRB, which is coordinated by Pacific States or facilitated by Pacific States Fisheries Commission. And we meet with, again, like Justin said, the other state coordinators for the Pacific Northwest and the provinces. And we're trying to go forward with a very cohesive, a coordinated approach that all the programs are attempting to do the same thing. We follow the same protocols when it comes to inspecting watercraft, decontaminating watercraft, and we've all signed on with rapid response recipes, I'd like to say, or procedures in an attempt to address these things in a coordinated fashion. One of the things, like I was talking about, decontamination, we have the ability in the state to do decons on those trailered watercraft. And these are some of the examples of our decontamination units. Decontamination is a fancy way of saying a very thorough hot water wash of a watercraft to remove all evidence of the mussels, so they can't be detected, and then the watercraft is not a threat. We have trailer decontamination units, and then we also have these smaller portable ones. And as you can see, we have them stationed around the state. The red dots are station locations. The blue dots are trailered, and then these little hand push ones are available for us to take care of watercraft again around the state.
So our efforts really are focusing on prevention, And when we intercept watercraft, taking action to eradicate and decontaminate those boats so that they don't establish in our waters. When prevention fails, we want to find that very first occurrence as quickly as possible. And the Department of Fish and Wildlife has been working for almost 20 years now on a systematic early detection monitoring program across the entire state. We sample water bodies between 1 and 3 times a year. You'll see in a moment that we actually significantly increase effort around the Snake River in fall of 2023. But what we've done is we've come up with a criteria to look at each public water body and each lake and river in our state and assign a risk value based on the matrix you see to the right, which helps us determine how often we're going to be doing our early detection monitoring. And when we do this, we look at a plethora of things. We take samples that look at the calcium content in order to make their shells, the larvae, need a certain level of calcium. So we want to best understand the calcium fluctuations throughout the year and on certain site conditions. We have a pointer grab, so essentially a little contraption that goes to the bottom and takes a sample so that we can look at the substrate. We're doing eDNA monitoring. We're also doing visual inspections of infrastructure as well as the shoreline. We're taking water quality information, and then we're also doing tows, taking plankton tows, taking samples that are then looked at under a microscope, similar to how Idaho detected their mussels. So at all the different sites, we use this variety of methods in order to use every tool in the toolbox to determine that invasive mussels aren't present. And then also if they were, we're very certain we would find that very first population. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time summarizing our efforts, but you can see, for example, that numbers in red were significantly increased in plankton tows primarily, as well as eDNA. But that step up in what we were doing is directly correlated to the information from Idaho that they had found quagga and zebra mussels. We know that Washington's waters are 375 river miles is the Vellager flows from Twin Falls, Idaho. And so we put a significant amount of effort into ensuring that our waters were not infested following the detection information from Idaho. In fact, we were done monitoring for the year and we redeployed crews, we reprioritized activities and did early detection monitoring at a high level of effort. Very proud of our team. And then focusing just on the Snake River, we had actually added 8 additional sites for a total of 31 sites. And this is the information specifically from the Snake River in 2023. Really can't state this enough. No quagga and zebra mussels were detected in the Snake River. No quagga and zebra mussels have ever been detected in Washington's waters. So we're very confident in that, and that's very much thanks to the efforts that the captain's leading. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Justin.
And then again, we can't do this on our own. So the Department of Fish and Wildlife partners with public utilities, with tribes, as well as federal agencies to share waters, to coordinate our effort so that we can increase the monitoring, but do it in a smart way where we don't have multiple teams showing up at the same site on the same day. More monitoring at a specific site is a good thing, but it should be spread out and be timed appropriately. Really cannot thank our partners enough. Go ahead, Captain.
So again, what we're ramping up for, which we hope we don't ever have to use, is response readiness. And again, one of the things on this, like Justin said, if we find the first mussel, which we're hoping not to, you always prepare for war, but hope for peace. The thing of it is we want to try to get on it fast. The faster you can detect them, the faster you can respond, the more likelihood that you can do an eradication and get them out of the water so they don't establish. So one of the things that we've been working on in the state is doing rapid response exercises, and we've been doing this for a number of years. Prior to, I want to say it was 2019, all experience of rapid response exercises had all been tabletop, where you get all the experts in a room and you theoretically go over a scenario if a mussel was discovered in blank location, how would you respond? What are the things that you would do? In 2019, we had a groundbreaking exercise where we actually did a live on the ground response exercise. We located it up out at the site was Kettle Falls up on Lake Roosevelt. And we responded just as if it was an actual detection. We brought in crews, we delineated the site, we set up containment barriers, we set up watercraft inspection programs, decontamination protocol. We did scuba divers doing exercises and how they would look for the mussel population, where they'd be found, where they'd be concentrated. And then we actually even simulated a chemical treatment in the water. I believe that's the next slide. While this was getting ready, this shows you some of the things that we set up there. We're getting divers in the water. We put up signs. We had an inspection. We had Puddles, our amazing mussel sniffing dog who has since retired. And then here is the response that I was just keying into, which was we actually simulated setting up a barrier over a supposed mussel population. And then we actually put a dye in the water, a completely biodegradable inert dye, to simulate a chemical treatment in attempting to eradicate. And so it was a very, very groundbreaking exercise, and it showed us that we are ready, but it also showed us that we have more to do. Again, this was one location, and it came up with a lot of different problems. When you're doing this on the ground, it is different than doing it in real life, or I mean, doing it theoretically. And so I'll have Justin talk about what we learned from the Department of Idaho State when they did their response.
Great. Well, we wanted to cover what Washington had done to date and where we are in terms of our own readiness. And we have a state response plan, and other jurisdictions do as well. And Idaho executed their rapid response plan extremely well. Really can't commend them enough. So they made the announcement from Governor Brad Little on September 18th. They then brought together all the different jurisdictions as well as regulators, developed a kind of like an incident command team, if you will, and executed their rapid response plan, which is identified here. Through following that process, they were able to do the first treatment October 3rd, which is just a phenomenally quick timeline. In terms of taking action with the goal of eradication, Idaho did everything right. They then did a second treatment on October 9th, and this is where we're at today. For us to determine whether or not the treatment was successful, it will, going back to the life cycle, the invasive mussels, we need any adults to spawn, and then monitoring will be picking up those planktonic villagers, or they could use eDNA. But the bottom line is that we don't know if the treatment will be effective until summertime best. But everything they did was right, and it was really an interesting thing from our perspective. Anything to add, Eric?
Well, and the thing about it is it makes us optimistic that Idaho took it so seriously, and they're still taking it seriously. They're under their state of emergency. They're going to be monitoring, and I can only believe that should they come back in that area and find additional villagers, that they'll do a subsequent treatment to it. And it's the thing of it is you have to hit it hard, hit it early, and keep doing it until, and we don't want the war lost, but you go and keep going until there's nothing else you can do. And keying in on this, the nice thing about it is we had some of our folks go to Idaho to observe what they were doing, to take notes and also assist. And I'll kick that back to you, Justin.
Sure.
About 5 minutes left.
Thanks, Maria.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the main takeaways here is that Governor Brad Little made this announcement and mobilized all of the state of Idaho's resources behind this eradication effort and the response. And in the state of Washington, we assumed that we would follow that same strategy. Quagga and zebra mussels are prohibited level 1, like the captain had stated. That means that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has authorities for emergency measures, which includes going to Governor Jay Inslee and asking for assistance, as well as mobilization behind an emergency order. what we saw in terms of sending people to Idaho is that that's the right approach. It's hard to tell from the photos here, but there were state employees not associated with invasive species that dropped their normal duties. They were supporting the field staff on the ground, whether that was getting food, buying equipment and supplies, freeing up those responders to focus on response. And then other state agencies that normally don't play a role in invasive species were mobilized to support the effort, such as the Idaho Department of Transportation that brought signage, brought equipment to assist with staging and that overall response. So in terms of the response, really cannot commend the state of Idaho enough for those really great efforts. But wanted to then talk a little bit about where we are in Washington. So we've mapped out the river miles from Twin Falls and the detection to our state waters. We know that it's 185 miles from Twin Falls to shared waters between Idaho and Oregon. And then Washington's waters are 375 river miles from the known detection. What is not known is how far could those villagers have floated in the 2 to 3 weeks between finding them in the water column and then executing an eradication treatment. There's lots of unknowns. We're taking it very seriously and we're taking steps to become more ready for a future where they could be established. That includes requesting federal financial assistance from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And then we are determining the full need, both in the short term as well as long term, in terms of actions and costs. This includes looking at successful response actions the department's taken around other emergencies, such as the ongoing European green crab emergency, mobilized after an emergency order from Governor Jay Inslee. And we've determined that in 1 year, we'd like to take the following actions. This includes creating an incident command structure and leadership group that would bring together state agencies, tribal nations, federal agencies, regional and local governments to advise a response. And thinking about this massive challenge, no one organization can answer the question. So we really need to bring together all the organizations and the best minds in order to be successful. Captain, over to you.
Yeah, again, now's the time to it's some people would go, oh, the fight is lost. They're in the river. No, now's the time to actually ramp up because we want to keep them out. And we also want to be prepared should they start working their way down the river to the state of Washington. Again, realize the Snake River is just one artery in the Columbia River system. And we want to, if they did become established, we still want to try to contain them in that area. There's still lots of water bodies across the state of Washington that we don't want infested. And so we need to start doing plans for that.
You're absolutely right. Increasing efforts, more monitoring, more watercraft inspections. We need to take our response plan and improve it. That was our takeaway from Idaho, is that we need to think more about site-specific planning. There's no one answer in every situation. We also need to realize that, there are ways that invasive mussels are moved other than in free-flowing rivers. Things like movement of live fish, for example. We want to take steps to address some of these other pathways. And then thinking about the risk to irrigation systems, hatcheries, there's tools and technologies that exist, but we don't exactly know what exists, what that cost would be, and how much funding over amount of time that might take in order to purchase equipment and then get it installed. And then, much like this webinar, we need to do more communications and more outreach to get the word out about how we can all work together. Captain, anything?
Again, the time is the sooner you act, the less expensive it is. The longer, the more in the future, things cost way more. An ounce of prevention now is worth millions of dollars in dealing with it.
Great. So Maria, I realize we're right at time, but this is our summary slide. So just wanted to recognize September 18th, 2023, the very first detection of quagga and zebra mussels in the entire Columbia River Basin occurred in Idaho. It is 375 river miles from the state of Washington. We know that there's well over $100 million in economic impact. That's uncalculated environmental impact. is a state we're seeking immediate federal financial assistance. We are taking action to update our response plan, but then we're considering other needs and how to fill that as well. And then for everyone here, this really illustrates the need more than ever to clean, drain, dry your watercraft and your equipment each and every time that you're out in the environment and moving it to a new area, because now potentially you could be moving invasive mussels around our waters. And over to you, Maria.
All right, thank you so much, Justin and Captain Anderson, for that awesome presentation. I have a few questions for you from the Q&A. And all the other participants, please continue to put your questions into the Q&A box. And the first question is, do we know what approach we would be able to take to address an introduction of Quagga zebra mussels, considering possible impacts and overlap of anadromous species? Especially in areas where these species are present almost year-round, could we treat chemically at all, or is there even a choice?
Sure, Eric, do you want me to take a crack and then you can jump in?
Absolutely.
So one of the main things that we're looking at are, so early detection is key. We want to find the population when it's very small so that we can take action and put containment systems in place. And we've been part of a regional consortium, including the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, looking at systems for containment, or even curtains and bubble barriers that might slow the spread of certain things. So say there's an anadromous water body. If we could create a barrier around the mussels where they are found, we could then exclude those threatened and endangered species from that area, and then be able to potentially use chemicals in a way that it wouldn't have negative effects, or potentially to install things like curtains that would hold the chemicals in one place until they were able to dissipate, where there would be no effects as well. So for me, I think a lot of it comes down to early detection and then putting a lot more emphasis into containment systems, because I believe that's probably our best shot in a lot of cases where there is anadromy. Eric?
Well, and it's just like what you said on site specific. So the question on whether or not can you put chemicals in the anadromous zones depends. It depends on that location, and just because maybe it's a fast moving, high velocity area. No, we're not going to be able to do a chemical application there. But if they're detected in an area where it's low flows, we can get a barrier around it, and we can get U.S. Fish and Wildlife consultation and NOAA consultation and an approval to put a chemical. Should we be able to contain it? Yes, we can do that. Again, but if we can't use chemical, are there other methods out there? Can we physically remove them? Could we use suction dredges, scuba? So again, it'll be a site specific. So it's a yes, maybe on can you use chemicals there?
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, thank you. Has anyone encountered any aspect of addressing invasive species issues that the tribes can or should approach where state and other federal agencies cannot or are having difficulties?
I would say that definitely tribal engagement in any invasive species across this jurisdiction is really needed and would be invited. Looking at our state response plan, we do envision holding a tribal consultation where we invite partnership and input on our plan. We are trying to address a shared problem that spans jurisdictions. And that means that we all need to work together in order to come up with the goals and how we're going to achieve those goals. And so I think I would say every invasive species that crosses jurisdictions, that should be the approach. Captain, what do you think about that?
Well, and the thing of it is the tribes, what we can't do is we can't go on to the reservation and enforce clean, drained, and dried regulations. Again, this is something that there are tribal members that have boats that transport them, and so that's where we want the tribes to step up and be partners with us as well. That's the big thing. As I think one of the questions, how it's landed is, well, maybe the tribes could put chemicals in the waters where the state can't. Now, the tribes would be subject to the same EPA and U.S. Fish and and Wildlife when it comes to the Endangered Species Act. They'd have to go hand in hand with us. But again, like Justin said, working with the tribes, partnering with them, we're seeing that as a very valuable asset going forward.
Excellent. Okay, next question reads, with the quagga detections in southern Idaho, could there be consideration for a larger focus on the invasive mollusks that are currently in the PNW to get ahead of the impacts that could snowball if when zebra quagga hit our waters?
Well,
Yes, if I'm go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, well, that's just what Justin put out right now is we are trying to ramp up. We are looking at what can we do to increase our efforts. We're increasing our monitoring in the state of Washington. We're finding ways to increase our boat inspections. And we're starting to do the internal discussions as an agency as to what type of things could this also impact for our operations down the line. Our hatcheries program is starting to talk about protocols to make sure they wouldn't be spreading. So again, this is the time to get ahead of that curve, looking at all the short-term and longer-term actions going forward. And there's discussions in the agency that in the 2025 legislative session, we'd probably be looking for a larger package to try to ramp this up again, to try to get ahead of it.
And the only thing that I'll add is, for monitoring of native species that we know are fairly certain would be heavily impacted in the future, this would be a great time to increase level of monitoring, gathering of baseline data so that we can better understand those long-term impacts. When we talk about that $100 million annually to hydropower systems, that's just a mitigation cost to keep the systems running. The mussels will be flowing through the system and we'll be having environmental impacts to native mollusks, to fisheries. We know that there will be a catastrophe. And so where those species are present, certainly taking action to develop that baseline data to better understand that long-term impact would be smart.
Okay, I'm going to read one more question and then I will share the code word for the pesticide credit because I know we're close to time. So the last question, can an organization provide wash stations for public access to water bodies? And if so, how?
Did it say I provide wash stations?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, actually, we're working on that. We have several sites that we have a thing called a CD3 station, clean, drained, and dried, and that's where the public pull up as they're leaving a water body. They remove all the vegetation off the boats. They pull their bilge plug. They vacuum. So we are getting those out there. But again, one of the biggest things is I'm a boat owner myself. And you don't have to have a station to do that. You can, when you pull your boat out of the water and it's sitting there on the trailer, you go around it, you remove the vegetation, leave it there at the boat ramp or the garbage can that's usually there. You pull your bilge plug, you make sure that it's clean, drained, and dried before you go down the road. It doesn't take any special equipment. And so again, the outreach and education of getting our boating public into that they're not rolling down the road with these things is the big key to not spreading them.
All right, I am going to pause the questions there, share my screen for how to get a pesticide recertification credit from Washington State Department of Ag. So if you are seeking that credit into the chat, please put your first name and your last name, followed by your license number, and then the code word. And this time it's a special webinar, you get a code phrase, so please include clean, drain, and dry. And that will go into the chat. While everyone's doing that, another question just asked if you've considered QR codes on boat docks for people to quickly send pictures if they see something that they think is invasive.
It's a great question. We do partner with the Washington Invasive Species Council on reporting, and that's a really great tool that we would link in a QR code on a sign, for example. So if you're interested in carrying around a digital field guide and then reporting any potential problem species, downloading the Washington Invasive Species Council's reporting application called Washington Invasives or WA Invasives is a really great way to have a digital field guide in your pocket. And then if you think you spot a quagga zebra mussel or anything else, you can easily snap a photo and it will get to the right place. So Do encourage everyone to download that, and we'll definitely think about including that in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all so much for attending today. I also wanted to thank the speakers as well who volunteered their time this morning to talk to us about the mussels and the threat to Washington's economy and environment. I encourage you, please reach out to them if you have questions or if we didn't quite get to your question today. And I will leave the webinar open for a couple more minutes just to make sure everyone has a chance to put their license number in. And aside from that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and please tune into our other webinars this week.